Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, Conscious Transformation, and Ascension Guide, bringing you this episode of Living the Shift. So this week, being that it's Valentine's Day, of course, this whole month I have been devoting to self-love, to unconditional self-love, to like things based in love. Really, that's where everything is based from. So when I was sort of tuning into what to talk about today, I was getting, living from fear. That keeps on coming up. Living from love versus living from fear. This is a really big one because we have it so embedded in our consciousness while we're incarnate here that we don't even realize how much we are doing in terms of living from fear. We actually have pretty much our entire society is based from fear and motivations from fear. And I've talked about this in all these various different topics, but this is a great one to really focus on specifically because we don't even realize we're doing it often. So what is living from fear? Think about it. How many conversations have you had? How many times have you said things like, oh, I can't do that because this will happen if I do this, or this won't happen if I do this, or I have to do this because otherwise this would happen. Most of the time when we say things like that, that's a motivation from fear because we fear that if we don't do something, this particular thing is going to happen. That's not quite the most positive outcome from our perception. Or vice, anything that's based like that. So look at our news. So the first thing I tell people to do all the time is stop watching the news. The news is completely based in fear motivation. And all that we talk about in the news pretty much is, what terrible things are happening, what to be afraid of, what to be, how to keep yourself safe, how to avoid this. And it's funny because the first thing people say to me is, well, even if we shift our perspective to love, how do I live in a world where we have like people bombing and shooting and killing and hurting each other and doing things to help, to limit each other? And I'm like, well, it's layer by layer. And really what it comes down to is, and happy Valentine's Day, is unconditional self-love. Because energetically, now logically, the mind / ego has a hard time looking at that. It has a hard time believing it. It says it's not logical to say that because they're like, well, a lot of people say, well, look at what happened to Jesus. And I'm like, well, except that's your perception, or that's the perception that's been passed down in history. But living from a place of love is a completely different way of existence than we've been in practice of doing. So the first step is really practicing self-celebration and self-love and knowing that you are divine and infinite being and that you are worthy of having creation exact. Oh, thank you, Sevi. And thanks for coming. How do we know that? So when we start looking at self-celebration, self-love, right, we are looking at the perception and understanding that we are the divine, right, that I am perfect. I am perfect as I am right now. So let's throw away, number one, all of the comments, all of the memes, all of the things that say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do to be perfect, so I can just accept myself as imperfect. Okay, that's a baby step. But the real step is to say, actually, I'm perfect as I am. And things are perfect as they are for whatever purpose of the higher, consciousness that we've created, for whatever lessons that we chose to learn, that we set up the stage for. We are the producers and writers of this play. And when we take that responsibility, we realize that we can change it by changing the core sentiments and motivations from it as well. So when we start to look at self-love and self-celebration, it's not the egoic self-love, the narcissistic self-love, the self-love of saying, oh, well, I'm awesome and you're terrible, or I'm so much better than you, or whatever. It's not that. It's saying, I'm awesome. I am divine, and so are you. And of course, because everything here that I see in my reality is a reflection of me, because we create our reality. And so you are me and I am you. So when we look at things from that perspective, if I really am truly coming from this place of self-love, then guess what? I can't do anything but love you. I can't do anything but do things that nourish the whole as well as myself. This is a funny thing because we always say, well, being selfish, the word selfishness and self-centeredness, we say that as a curse word and as a bad thing, except that when we do it from unconditional self-love, from a higher perspective of love, from full acceptance and lack of judgment, and coming from a place of I am divine and I am perfect for what I have incarnated in this form, in this way, in this environment for now, then, and in this form, no matter what it is, whether it's thin or heavy or tall or short or red-haired or black-haired or whatever, it's perfect for whatever the lessons are. And that includes people with handicaps and all kinds of, what we call, disfigurations and all things like that. They all serve a purpose. And it's time for us to turn the perspective around to really celebrate our uniqueness and how we, as the divine, created all these facets of ourselves so that we can just reflect these different facets that are pieces and parts of the whole that we are as divine consciousness. So when we do that, it shifts our entire experience, right? When we live from a place of fear, we're living from a place of ego and exclusion and separation, right? And I always say ego, I always use the disclaimer that ego is not bad. It is simply a creation that we have made that was to explore individuality and separation. So any of the emotions and the thoughts, the judgments that come from the ego are made from separation and identity. So it's naturally based in duality, in right and wrong and good and bad and all that kind of stuff. When we get to this place of higher, of higher presence, of accepting the whole, of seeing the duality and the trialities, and allowing ourselves to recognize the whole as well as the individual pieces and parts, then we don't have to do that kind of judgment anymore. Then we live from a place of acceptance and seeing things and committing ourselves to seeing things from a higher consciousness. So when we do that, we stop judging. Because judgment comes from duality. It comes from the belief that there's a right and a wrong and a good and bad. And as I always say all the time, if you ask 10 different people if something is right or wrong or good or bad, you're going to get 10 different answers. So you're not going to get like an overwhelming whole that's always going to say this is right or this is wrong or this is good and this is bad. It's all going to be based on individual filtration of the identity and separation of their experience with whatever it is that they're judging, right? So when we get to that higher place, when we get to this place that we focus on self-love, and self-love really is this, like I said, it comes from I am divine, I am perfect, I am whole, I am this amazing, perfect embodiment of the divine as this particular facet that I've chosen to be a part of, right? So when we do that, and then we start recognizing everybody around us is the same, guess what? All of that fear goes away because you and me, we're the same. Fear comes from exclusion. Fear comes from exclusion, from separation, from the belief that something is outside of us and unknown, right? We fear the unknown. That's the biggest thing. Maria Curie said, what's the quote that I use all the time? Oh, there's nothing to be feared, only understood, which is the truth. And part of that is as we focus on self-consciousness, on self-love, on self-awareness and observance and acceptance, we begin to see the bigger picture. And as we see the bigger picture, we start understanding the bigger picture, and then we start accepting more. So when we do that, then we start creating our realities in a vibration where stuff that is harmful or painful or hurtful stops happening in our realities. And people like I said, it's very hard for us from the egoic mind to say how to understand how that happens, right? Because we're like, well, there's bad people and there's bad this. And I'm like, no, it's just, we're all just different facets of the divine. And when we get to that point, I have people say to me all the time, what's the biggest example of that? People are like, oh, well, what about Hitler, right? Or, Genghis Khan, or, there's a bajillion different kinds of individuals through our history that we can, sort of claim that. But I'm like, well, it all starts within. And the way I understand it works is this: all of this reality around me, all of you, everybody who are me in a different facet and vice versa, we're here to give each other messages that we haven't yet remembered. So sometimes we have messages that we're not hearing within ourselves, we're not seeing in the bigger picture, because we are in this dense form and this part of our consciousness sometimes, is in forgetfulness, right? So as we're assimilating and allowing the whole consciousness to be present in all parts of us, the remembrance becomes more and more. But in the meantime, we have a lot of messages going on, like music and people and things we say. And I always say billboards and license plates and everything that we see, things that are happening outside of us reflect what's going on inside of us. So getting back to the whole, Hitler or whatever, how I understand it is this: if we have something going on that does not serve us at the core level, and this is really what's going on at a collective level today, right? So if we have something that's going on that's not serving us at a core level because we're running from a place, we're being managed from the place of the ego and separation or whatever, and exclusion, then the higher self says, okay, here's a message here, right? I'm going to put this in your path. I'm going to give you maybe a car accident. I'm going to give you maybe a sickness or an injury of some sort, an issue with, I'm going to break off a relationship or change your environment because this isn't serving you, because you're not getting the message, right? You're falling into comfort and beliefs, that are based in separation and fear, being motivated by fear. So we're going to just break this so that you can go do something else, right? Or go into a place that does serve you in a higher place. So sometimes we can be really dense. It happens. So it's like we don't just have plans A, B, and C. My understanding is we have plans like quadruple X, quadruple Y, quadruple Z, and more, of every step we go where we ignore the messages within ourselves, that we don't listen to the whisper of the higher consciousness that we have, the louder the message gets, right? So then it comes louder within us. We then get a situation that happens. Sometimes we get a health issue, it gets louder. Sometimes we have an accident, that's even louder. Sometimes we have, a huge environmental adjustment, say a relationship breakup, a job breakup, or whatever, even louder. Well, so it continues to go on. And guess what? Some of the work that I do is so very collective, at the collective level, that when we, we don't realize, so what many don't realize is we have this collective consciousness of which we're all a part, different facets of the same divine consciousness. And it's sort of concentric, right? It starts out in the cell and it gets bigger into, in the body, cells, organs, the body, and then it goes on and on and on. But we have so many different levels and layers, and it's so many concentricities that as we get larger and larger, there are themes that we are playing out in terms of collective consciousness, because that is still a separation in itself. It is still an individual consciousness of a bigger consciousness, right? So we have themes and lessons that we're playing out. And so if we're not getting them all at the individual level, so pretend that we're all cells, right? So pretend our bodies are all cells. Well, these bodies, we have these things playing out and we're just ignoring them, and they're not fitting into the bigger picture the way that we've planned in our higher consciousness. Well, then our higher consciousness, we're at our higher consciousness, we're going, okay, we have to make this louder, right? So we have to break something for it to be noticed. We have to change something to make it noticed. And then we get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So at the earth level, let's just say, we have individuals, we have communities, states, countries, nations, the same thing, continents, right? Elements. And so the more we ignore the smaller messages, the bigger they get. So when we get to places where we have, say, nationwide issues or earthwide issues, it's because we have forgotten to pay attention to some particular piece of the whole picture that would bring it back into that, not bring it back, to would allow the harmony in the highest perspective, highest kind of vibration. That's when things like Hitler happen. That's when things like what's going on in this world happens. It's sort of like it's like, okay, now we just need to make this really like urgent and imminent and right in our faces so that we shift. As we gain our, like, as we come back to our remembrance and consciousness while we do this, then we like can say, oh yeah, how did I miss that? Okay, now I'm going to just shift. And then that's like part of like allowing the shift to happen, right? So when we start looking at those things from from world events, right? So many people that get so incensed on politics, on the government, and all this kind of stuff. And yes, it is very limiting what's going on right now. But that's because we have gotten to this level of looking the other way and not looking at our own messages within. Where does it start? Within us. So we got to this place of not looking at messages within our communities, within our states and nation, whatever. And actually it's like pretty much around the world, that not only do we have political systems breaking down all over the world, we also have the earth doing what she's doing, shifting physically to shake off this big, heavy crust of stuff that isn't serving us in the higher consciousness in the bigger picture. So we have all these levels of things going on. And it starts, though, at our commitment to celebrating ourselves, to coming back to doing what I call doing the work, although I don't like calling it work because it doesn't have to be hard. It's just a focus. It's a commitment, right? And when we get to this place of commitment to say, I'm going to commit to me, to find my place of self-love, because that is where the core of it all lays, right? All of it lies, or however you want to put it. That's where it all lies. Our judgments of each other, our projections at each other, our prejudices, our biases, all have to do with us having judgments within ourselves at some very deep levels. Because when we're in a place of happiness, when we're in a place of joy and contentment with ourselves and in a place of unconditional self-love, then we can't do anything but care about everything around us, right? So it's illogical to the mind, because the mind's like, oh, well, if you love yourself first, well, then, everybody's going to be excluded and, everybody's just going to hurt each other. And I'm like, no, actually, it's quite the opposite when we truly love our children. So here's the thing. People ask me all the time, well, what about egotists, narcissists, all kind of stuff? The thing is, people who strut around and talk about how great they are in comparison to other people, and that other people are less than they are, those are actually some of the people who have the lowest self-esteem and the lowest levels of self-love that exist. Because what they have to do is project that, because they have to project themselves as more important and more valuable, because they don't believe it within themselves, and they want other people to believe it of them, so that then they can in turn believe it of themselves, which they don't. So it's this cycle that continues on. But when we're truly in this place of unconditional self-love, we get to a place where we say, you know what? I am awesome as I am. I don't need you to tell me that I'm awesome. I don't need to do anything to prove myself. I don't have to limit myself. I don't have to give myself away or sacrifice myself to prove that I'm pretty awesome as I am, and I'm pretty happy about that. And then when I truly am in that place, I then can trust. I'm coming from a place of trusting and loving my higher consciousness, my higher guidance. And when my higher guidance comes in, which supersedes the egoic guidance, and I trust that because I love myself and I know that I'm divine and infinite, and that I have access to all the information in the multiverse. I just have to remember how to do so. So when I trust that, and I trust my guidance, and I know what that feels like because it comes in without any emotion. It comes in, it like anything from fear, anger, anxiousness, or whatever, that's all ego-based stuff that we always say, oh, my guidance told me that I have to stay away from this because that's dangerous. And I was like, well, and I'm always like, well, you said dangerous, and that would be ego. Because all this, when we live from this place where all of this is an illusion, right? Then we realize that what's playing out is a fulfillment of the bigger picture of the play that has been planned, right? So even if we see it or part of it, and then we are coming from this place of unconditional self-love, right? Instead of fearing what we're seeing or fearing all kinds of stuff. Because when we fear, we have all this chatter going on in our head and we don't listen to our higher guidance, right? How many times have many have just gone to this place where they get panicked, right? Many of us, all of us at some point get panicked about something. And then we're like, oh, and then we have all this stuff chattering in our head. Oh, I've got to do this, or I've got to avoid this, or I can't do this, or I have to do this, and da, 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 da. And then we miss that quiet little voice that's coming from the center of us saying, just do this, right? And especially if the ego looks at it and says, oh my God, no, because then it starts giving all these like reasons why not to, because it's afraid, because like from what it's seen before and on movies and TV and the news and whatever, oh, well, if I do this and this is going to happen. But if we stay clear on this guidance of just do this, right? Without the emotion, and we trust, it always works out. And that's living from a place of love, right? When we live from a place of fear, we avoid that centered voice because we have so many excuses why not to, because we fear what we don't understand, we don't fear what we don't see, and we are seeing from a pretty limited perspective with our eyes, ears, nose, all like that. That's still very limited. It's when we start trusting our higher guidance, what we have inside, to guide us without that emotion in a place of love and trust, that then we actually make decisions that are truly for our highest and best. I don't even like using that because that's actually sort of a duality-based term. We start making decisions based on the bigger picture. And if we commit ourselves, so what I commit myself to, everything, happens with ease and flow and fun and joy and prosperity and health and vibrance, right? Or whatever. So like, that's just my auto play. And as long as it plays out like that, I've come to this place of saying, okay, so I'm just going to let go how we get to this, and I'm just going to trust it happens. And if I'm guided to do this, even if I have no idea why, in even situations that might, to the ego, seem really dangerous or scary, then I'm going to trust. And there have been so many times. So, we can talk about being in danger, what we call dangerous situations. Well, that'll happen less and less as you become more conscious and more focused in self-love, right? And this is it's a lot to try to roll into a half hour because it's a practice, it's a habit, it's a rehabituation, and it's what I start with when I teach the really advanced practice of Trinity Energy Progression, because if we don't come from this place and clear out all the webs to this place of unconditional self-love, we're only going to allow ourselves to be so powerful, right? So if you're a healer, it doesn't matter whether you're a healer, what you call a healing facilitator, if you are a psychic, or if you're anything, no matter what you are, no matter where you are in your life, you will only be so pure and so powerful as you do in the way you love yourself. Because if you love yourself unconditionally and you come from that place of love and you trust the higher guidance, you will do what your guidance, what you feel, because you don't even hear it, you just know it eventually. You just follow it and you flow with it. And it's not being a puppet, because the guidance is you. It's not coming from outside of you. It's just a different part of our consciousness. And when we start acting from that, right, and allowing those levels of our consciousness to assimilate together, then everything just becomes easy, and you stop having those situations. And even in a situation that some might deem dangerous or whatever, we just progress forward because we trust. And when we do that, we stop putting all this energy to fear and to anxiety, to the what ifs, to the, oh, I can't do that because, and actually, I've changed around the energy of what if. I changed it around to say things like this. So what if I allowed this possibility that that I'm seeing in guidance? Like, what if? What if I allowed all possibility in playing this out? And that sort of opens up the doors to allow things to resolve themselves in ways that we could not control because we couldn't see it when we're not seeing it from the bigger picture, right? So our first step is looking at how, like, and I have this group that I started on Facebook this month, the Ways to Celebrate Me. And if you want to come join us, please do. It's fun because it's like I committed to 50 different ways of celebrating me this month, and everybody's sort of picking up the ball and running with it, which I think is great. And I have everybody posting every day, like so many people posting every day about how they're celebrating them. And it sounds sort of 3D and mundane, but it's really not, because we forget. And I've talked to a lot of people who haven't been posting and are in the group, but they've said to me, watching what's going on in the group, even though I haven't posted, I have been much more conscious and aware of where I'm. Hey, Anne, thanks for joining. I've been much more conscious and aware of where I'm not celebrating me, like where I'm giving myself away, where I'm limiting myself. And then I ask myself, why am I doing that? Like, why am I giving myself away, or why am I sacrificing this? Am I doing it from a place where I'm saying, well, if I do this, this person will love me, and I have to be shown that I'm loved or lovable to whatever, to believe it myself. Like, we can always turn it around. And I always say, like, it's important for us to get to the whys and self-responsibility of, like, why we're triggered about something, why we have anger or fear or whatever, because not what with anything that's outside of you, because any kind of fear is that of something that's happening outside of you, it comes from what's inside. Right. And we have beliefs. I have to learn lessons this way. I have to have this kind of set of events to learn this lesson. And then that can be like, and that could be some pretty violent stuff, individually and collectively. And that's what we're looking at now. And it's like, okay, guess what? I choose to learn from love. I choose to now proceed from love. And I choose to proceed from a place of unity and wholeness and trust and unconditional self-love versus fear and anxiety and anger. And I have committed to, if any of that ever comes up, for me to step back immediately and to observe and to shift it so that I can move forward in a different way. It's funny because I laugh, and people who know me, they know I'm sort of like this, that if anything comes up, that I find that I'm getting fearful of, I will purposely throw myself into it, right? And that could be like anything. That could be like, zip lining or standing on the edge of a cliff or whatever. But if something really bothers me or makes me feel like a little like uncomfortable, then I shift. I do my, in my consciousness, I shift myself to a place of acceptance and wholeness. And then I push myself to do it so that I don't fear it anymore. Because really, that's really what we fear. We fear it we don't understand. We don't yet remember. Actually, I'm just going to add to that quote to say, we fear we don't remember yet. And as we remember more in terms of expanding our consciousness, like I just call it expanded remembrance, then we start just making decisions consistently from a different place. And when we do that, we then stop needing to have all of these really contentious, friction-based interactions and experiences, even here on this earth. The other night, I had somebody say, oh, well, this earth was created to go through lessons that way. I'm like, well, maybe originally, and now we're shifting it. And to shift it is for us to shift the way we experience it and choose to experience it. So it's up to us to do it. We're not victims of the earth. We're part of the consciousness of the whole, and we're the ones that have created it. And so we can change it too. So that first step is looking in the mirror and saying, I love you. And looking at yourself and saying, so where am I neglecting me? Like, where am I loathing of myself? Where am I angry with myself? And that's where we do things like energy work, energy healing. We do, meditation, and we do all kinds of stuff to support that shift of resolution. People call it healing. I just call it, resolution, completion of the lessons, that we could do it differently now. So that's it. That's your homework for this week, your home play for this week. And being that it's love day, I call it love day. It's a matter of saying, how can I love me better? Right? Where don't I love me? And look at, sometimes we get lost in the clues. We don't even realize that we're giving ourselves. Like when we have judgments of other people, when we're angry with other people, when we judge them, when we hold certain things against them, that is a big clue as to, so why do I care? Why do I care why this person does this or says this or acts this way? When I shift that to, when we keep on saying, why do I care? Right? The key is to get back to a place of why, what is it within me? Because often when somebody does something, it triggers us, is because it's like, well, it makes me feel like I'm inadequate, or I feel like I have to do this because I feel that I'm unworthy. I always say it's always at least, anybody's heard of the Kevin Bacon game of like 6 steps to Kevin Bacon. It's like 2 steps to unworthiness, like in almost anything that motivates us from separation. So it's coming to that place of saying, okay, so I created this and this acceptance, and there's these steps of embracing ourselves, of allowing ourselves to see the bigger picture and seeing how it all fit together. Why we would have the soul agreements that we had to play out some stuff that might even seem horrific to the ego, right? Rape and abduction and abuse and all that kind of stuff. But there's a purpose, or else it wouldn't exist in this reality. And then we stop judging it, and when we can say, okay, and then we can stop. Then the next step is usually we judge ourselves and say, well, why would I put that in my reality? And then it's like, well, when we step back and say, so why would I? Like, how would it serve me? How would it have served me? How was it a catalyst for me? And then we get to that, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm thankful to have had that and have had a soulmate that had said that they would do that, even though it would seem really sucky down on earth. And I'm grateful for who I am in creation so that I can change it now and just completely move on without that, free of that. It frees up so much energy. If we took away all the energy that we put into living from fear and anger and anxiety and shifted it to just a place of self-presence, self-love, self-acceptance, and acceptance of the whole, everything would be resolved immediately. We'd be done. We would just all be in another, wherever we're going next, whatever's the next project. So this week, start looking at that. Observe yourself, observe your judgments, observe your any negative comments, thoughts, or whatever, and then start asking yourself, why do I care? And I am, and start looking at yourself in the mirror. I always tell people, one of the things I tell my students is an exercise is literally getting naked, standing in front of the mirror, and just saying, I love you. And even if you don't feel it in the beginning, you just start to align the habits of doing that, of writing down, like, say at least one to 3 things a day of why you're awesome. Because there are so many things, why you believe you're awesome. And yes, does it seem like it's from the ego? Yes, it does in the beginning. But as you go along, you realize, well, I'm just awesome because of all the facets of individuality that I've created in this embodiment for this life. And then you start seeing, in doing that, then you start seeing all the beauty in everything and everyone around you. And it shifts our perception, and that's how it shifts our reality and our experience. So that's a lot in a half hour. So have a great love day. Love yourself. Breathe in love, as I posted. Breathe in love. Breathe out love. And repeat. That's all we need to do. And we'll see you next time. So thanks for joining. This is Angela Coulter signing off on this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.